Hi everyone, how's it
Hi,
going?
Chris.
I saw that some of you guys are posting some trouble with the subsurface scattering, huh? And seems like we are having some problems with subsurface scattering. I saw a post at least. Let me see here. And I was thinking actually today we could go over some stuff like maybe like some troubleshooting. Because I was thinking, I was like, I can share what I'm doing right now. It's basically like I'm just doing a render right now. And let's see, where is my stuff? Right here. Okay, let's share this. So I'm doing this render right now, right? So it's running right there in the background. And I did some more work in the hair, but I still have the hair going through her face, basically, and landing, below her chin. So I still have to address that stuff. What I did is I tried some of the things that people were mentioning in our group. For example, like using a mask for the density. But the thing is, like, you cannot use density maps painted inside of Maya, right? Like, you cannot paint a mask in here because we're using multiple UDIMs. So, like I said before, I mean, like, there's no way to paint a density mask. But if you're bringing from another app, like in this case here, I just followed the example that let me see who was doing it. That was I think it was Hamza, yeah. Uh, he was basically like he created this one here, and he was showing like it's like if you create a mask in ZBrush, right, and it's across different UDIMs, you can bring it as a density mask in Maya. It should work fine. But at the same time, I posted this article from Autodesk that says that the problem is not the multiple UDIMs. The problem is actually the tools to do the 3D painting in Maya that don't support the UDIMs, right? So if you're using like any type of like 3D painting brushes in Maya to paint across stuff, or just like paint color or whatever that is, it doesn't support like multiple UDIMs. So you have to do this stuff like outside of Maya if you want to do it. But it worked. I mean, like I was able to actually paint like a very crappy mask. This one here for the eyebrows, and I tested it, and it actually worked. So there's an option, right? Like, but at the same time, it's not going to be something interactive that you're going to be able to, like fine tune and everything inside of Maya, just like visually seeing everything and then painting things. To do that, you're going to have either like a separate model that has just one UDIM, like I mentioned before, and then you do that and do the painting everything here, and then use that mesh just for the grooming itself, but then hide it at render time and just render the actual mesh like this one. Or you're gonna have to do in ZBrush, right? But in fact, it worked. So let me cancel this render here. I think I've seen enough of it to have an idea. My wife saw the model and she said, like, it looks a lot like me. I think you got the nose pretty well. But she was actually saying that the hair color that was very blonde in that picture, she was actually saying, can you make it less blonde? Because my hair is a little bit more, it's like on the medium brown instead of like completely, blonde. So that's what I'm trying to do. It's like adding a little bit of it's like a redness in there, but still, like, there's a lot of stuff crossing, right? Like the hair in here is crossing with those ones, so there's some interpenetrations in there. So all this stuff I'm gonna have to address, and then I'm gonna keep adding more and more curves, and I don't want to bore you guys with that because I'm gonna just be doing the same thing I'm doing since like 2 days now, like adding curves on top of stuff. And then if I cannot at the end get those guys to conform to it, those ones in the neck, because at least yesterday the ones I added in here already helped. Some of those actually, it's like popped right there, and then they start following everything. But I still have like plenty of space to add more curves. But even if at the end I don't have anything for those guys, what I can do, I can actually select them with the freeze tool, and then invert the selection and just like affect just what's inside of the frozen area. And then I can just paint, for example, a shorter version of them. So I can actually add as maybe like flyaways, or maybe just turn them very short and disappear with them basically. But I think as I add more curves, at least the number of them is going to be smaller and smaller until they almost disappear. And then if there's any left over, I can just like get rid of them, or even cut. There's a cut brush, you can cut stuff. But I think my intention here today is to add like the flyaways. I'm gonna do some flyaways because right now everything is very simple, right? So I'm gonna just add some flyaways with another different description just for that specific reason. And then from that point on, I was thinking, first I just want to talk about, for a second, just opening a little parenthesis here, about the registration in the new platform. Thank you so much, because I got 100% of you, like the entire class of July, it's finally there. So all of you guys registered, which is really cool. So you should have access now. You probably noticed that I gave you access to the reviews in a separate kind of like course, but at the same time, you still have them part of the list of all of our lessons in there. You have them in there as well, and that's temporary. You know, my intention is to actually, once this class is done in a this weekend, basically, like when you finish our final reviews on Saturday, we're gonna be done with this one. So I'm gonna remove the reviews from the class itself, but I'm gonna keep in that separate pseudo class that I created, because I want to all of you guys from the classes of May, June, and July to be able to see all the reviews. So so you're gonna have like 4 times 3, so like 12 of those review sessions. And then it's cool to see like my comments about different subjects and everything. But at the same time, I don't want to have that stuff available for whoever is buying the courses from this point on as a separate thing. For example, like if someone buys just one class, right? Like just like May, for example, I don't want them to have access to the reviews in there. What I want to do is to actually give them support through both the forum. So the group that I have to, it's like finally start getting more in tune with that and get more in there, like more often. And also through the classrooms, like, because right now I have the classroom, you have like this little form you saw at the top. Like if you look at the top, it says like there's a little box in there, it says comments. And if you click on it, it's basically like you can open a new thread and you can start a little discussion in there. And those discussions I can actually track and see what the problem is. It's like, and I can respond in there. I think, I believe like other students can reply to the same thread as well, so you can have those discussions within the classroom, which is really cool. At least like it's isolated, like it's like I'm referring to this specific lesson and I have this specific question about it. So I'm planning to open this one for anyone who signs to the class, independently of what package they get in there. But just for you guys from those 3 first classes, I'm gonna give like access to all the review sessions, right? And then obviously, if whoever signs for the live sessions for September, they're going to have their own set of reviews in there. So that's just like opening that parenthesis. So about the working here. So at this point, if you watch the other classes, the test 2 ones, all of them, I didn't spend too much time like grooming or anything like that, because the hairs are kind of simple in a certain way, right? They're kind of short and they have a lot of design elements and stuff. So this one here is kind of like the hair itself is a project, right? I'm gonna have to keep going with it, adding more curves, making sure that following that structure that I mentioned before, yesterday, right? So like the ones coming from the very top in here, gonna be the ones covering everything else. And then I'm gonna basically like separate like maybe like in 4 different layers. So like this top layer, and then around here, and then around here, and then almost at the base of the hair around there. So increasingly, I'm gonna get deeper and deeper with them, right? So like those ones here are gonna be the ones actually producing all the wavy stuff coming from underneath, which are gonna have to produce in there. And then the ones a little bit higher are gonna cover them. And I have to do this carefully so I don't have this kind of effect here that's hair coming from inside the other pieces of hair, right? I wanna make sure that everything kind of like layers, it's like kind of like lays on top of each other. And that's the impression I want to cause at the end, So this one is here started to kind of work in there. I can show you the model itself in the viewport. Oops, not this one. Let's just bring this one here. And you can see like it's starting to turn around. Let me just hide the curves themselves. Let's hide that. So it's starting to turn around in there and cover the other ones, right? But it's not great just yet. And this one is here, they are not following that structure just yet. They're the direction, right? They're going kind of down in here. Those ones are starting to follow that direction. But the thing is like the curves are going to have to add some of them close to each other and then do what I did yesterday. For example, like get 2 of them at a time and then come with them separate all the way to closer to the tip. And then closer to the tip, I actually just, it's like pinch them together and create some kind of clump. And then I'm gonna have to do this in multiple spots just to have more control. Because if you have like 2 or 3 curves coming to a point, you basically like increase your chance to actually capturing a nice strand of hair, right? And then so that clump, it becomes more controllable. So my plan is to do this like maybe like 2 at a time or 3 at a time, really close to each other, just to create this this effect, to create all those layers and everything. But the hair itself is a project, and it's almost like if I keep doing this today, it's gonna be a little bit more of the same that I did yesterday. It's just like basically like sculpting and tweaking stuff and bring it down. But in terms of like new techniques and things like that, probably not that much, So I'm gonna ask you guys now to vote. I mean, like I never did this before, but to vote, because either we can keep going with this and you just basically like watch what I'm doing with the hair itself, or we can tackle something else. For example, like if let's say like if there are questions still about something that's really bothering most people, let's say like if it's the skin shade or like the sculpting around the eyes or whatever it is, or the iris sclera shade or whatever it is, maybe you guys can actually give me a, it's like if you can find like a way to come to a consensus about what's the most important part at this point, and then and go to maybe go through a few of them, so I can try to solve the problem for you guys, because I don't want you to be left hanging, So once this class is done, I mean, it's like we're gonna have the reviews coming on Saturday, but at the same time, I want you guys to be able to advance. And if you're stuck with something, it's like that's not gonna be helpful to you. So what do you guys think? I mean, like, should we go that way, or should I just keep doing whatever I'm doing and maybe like do some more sculpting, or what's the scoop from you guys?
Wouldn't mind seeing some more skin shader stuff.
Okay, yeah, skin shader.
But I'm selfish.
Yeah. Let's see what else you guys have to say. We can do a bunch of things. I mean, like I just want to. What I want to do is actually just make sure that our time is used the best we can. If it's better, if just like keep going with whatever I'm doing, I'm gonna do this. But if it's better, like just to go through the skin shader again, explore it, and talk about it, I can do that as well. Anything you guys want. So, what do you guys think? Anyone else? Yes.
So I was thinking. Sorry, I was thinking more if you could go back a little bit, like from the beginning, like talk a little bit more on your approach to start a sculpture. How do you understand the forms and how you translate that to your sculpt?
Yep.
Like nothing. I mean, more specific than that. I don't know. Guess just talk more about that.
Okay. Yeah.
For my part, I think the skin, troubleshoot the skin, and it would be a good idea, I think.
Yeah, the skin as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So the biggest question about the skin is like, you guys having trouble with the scale, or is it like the albedo coloring, or the shader itself, the way that the nodes are plugged? What's the main thing?
One question I have, Chris, is that like you're only using like your spec map, your diffuse, your bump height, and what else? That's
there is a coat that's basically a secondary specular that's plugged as well.
But you're plugging your spec map with the adjustments with the, was it the remap node into the coat?
No, it's just like, I think it was just playing with the values, I think like with the exposure and stuff. So let's start with the skin. Let's open this one the way it is right now, since we have the render right here. And
from so many like skin shader setups I've seen online, like you're using so few texture maps to a much better result than I've really seen from anyone else. And it's pretty impressive. Just kind of curious in how you get them all like, working more cohesively together, so to speak.
Yeah. I think it's a good question. I mean, like, and that's the whole idea for me about approaching things is like trying to keep it as simple as possible and push as far as we can with the simplicity, right? And then at some point, if something breaks or if something is not producing the result that I want, then I can just like, okay, let's add another node in here. But you're completely right. I mean, like I keep everything super simple. So let's look at the render right now. So the result right now, it looks like this, right? The last thing I did to change the skin shader was that node with ambient occlusion, right? That I added. See like how pale I just noticed like how pale the caruncles are here. I tweaked the shader and it looked like completely pale and dead right now. So I have to recover some of the color of it. But let's look at the shader network. So let's bring this onto the side. And since she's here, let's get our shader network. Now let's update you guys on whatever I have for the skin shader. So node-wise, it's nothing, right? It's just that, it's like super simple. So let's see what is in there. So so I have my, let's bring to the side here so I can actually see each one of those nodes. Let's bring it right here. And then this guy a little bit bigger so you can actually see as well. Let's get to the shader network. Should be the last one here. So many, all those nodes I plug it on the XGen is like they all take a lot of space in there. So that's the shader in here. And then I'm going to start like, just like, let's talk about each one of those steps first. So the base I'm not using at all. So just ignore the base. The base is cool, like I mentioned before, if you want to combine, for example, a skin shader with a diffuse shader. So basically, like you can create effects like rubber, right? If you have something to look more like rubber, then you're going to combine a little bit of the diffuse with subsurface scattering. So you can create a little bit of more like a solid kind of object with a little bit of subsurface in it. But in this case here, I'm going full on subsurface scattering on her face. So I'm going to minimize this one. Let's go to the specular here. So the specular is plugged. Specular color is right here. So that's the spec right there. So let's see first the settings for the specular. I'm using like in this case here like 0.6, and it's going to be completely dependent on your maps, right? So for a visual reference, let's go and look in here. So my spec map looks like this, not this because there's one visible here, but the spec map looks like this. It's basically like just the painting I mentioned with the spray, right? Painting with spray, and then always measuring what the result is by comparing this one with the shader network in Maya that's using the bump height as well, because the bump height is going to be kind of like either fighting this maps, or is going to be helping those maps, right? So if I have like the whole theory is that if I have like this specular map here, which basically is just going to break up the specular a little bit more, right? Instead of like looking plasticky, it's going to have like a little bit more of certain areas with a little bit more speck than others. So you're going to have, you know, it's like those little specky areas like this. But at the same time, you know, it's like it's not controlling, let's say, the roughness of the map, right? The roughness is going to be basically the same all the way across, but I have to control the roughness of the map either with the roughness map plugged in there, so you can actually tweak, cheat that, right? And create something that goes like from more shiny, like shinier to all the way to rough. And then that you can control with the black and white map. But my choice was to actually use a bump height map to create the graduate, the gradient between those areas, right? So if I need something that's a little bit more shiny, so less rough, I'm gonna keep like the bump height very, very low, which is gonna be like black, right? And then either area, like in each area that I need a little bit more roughness, I'm gonna break up the surface by using a bump, which is basically like the cell bump that we're using in Maya. And then in areas like the cheeks, for example, I'm gonna be controlling with the bump height, which looks like this, right? So you see like the nose is a little bit black and the cheeks as well. So that means they're a little bit shinier than areas like this one. So around here, the bump's gonna be higher, and that's gonna cause a breakup. And then basically like you're gonna get like naturally rougher. So when the specular hits this area here, it's gonna look very broad and very diffuse. When the specular hits this area here, it's gonna get shinier, right? So that's the whole way that I'm using those maps. So this is the spec, right? Not a lot of spec in the ears, not a lot in the lips, because the lips, like I said before, I'm already eliminating all the bump height from here. So basically like all the bump is being eliminated. So naturally it's gonna be a little smoother already, right? So this one combined with this guy here, right? Super shiny, so no bump. With this one here, with a little bit of speck, but not a lot, is producing this type of result here. So there's a tiny little speck in there, and a very diffuse kind of speck in there because the secondary specular that's happening from the coat. But it's not something super strong, unless I want to go for like a super shiny, like a lip gloss, right? In that case, I would really crank it, and I would have to paint that much wider in here to create the effect that's like a lip gloss, right? So visually, if you guys are watching the lesson later, so this is like what I have for my specular, which is a very simple map, and it's a copy of my HD geometry model without the HD. I don't use HD for any of those secondary maps in here. So the HD is just for the color map and the displacement, but for the spec, for the bump height, and you know, the melanin of the hair I'm gonna use later. And in this case here, my test is the hair density, right? So all of them are just like using either like 4K versions of the map or 2Ks. In the case of the hair density, is just a bunch of 2K maps. So let's go back to the shader network. So that was the spec, and then the spec is plugged right here, right? So let's look at the settings. I'm controlling the overall specularity with this one here. So like I have like 0.6, right? And then the roughness, that's 120, which is very shiny, right? It's not like a mirror shiny, but it's very shiny. So that's basically what you're getting around the nose in here, the tip of the nose, right? So you're getting a little bit of the shininess right there. But it's not like, again, like there is a little bit of a diffuse effect in there because there are some bumps and little pimples and things in there, right? So it's actually helping to diffuse a little bit of the effect in there. The index of refraction is like 1.55. And then let's look at the map itself. So the map is going to be a combination of all those spec maps that came straight from ZBrush, right? Very crappy 4K, you can tell right there, right? Very simple maps, just using a lot of spray. So the spray is a combination of, like I mentioned a couple of times, you know, it's like either for color or the spec. The way I paint, I use like very broad, so like big brushes with low intensity, combined with like smaller brushes and getting more intensity as I get smaller, for example, so you get these tiny little specks like that. So it's a combination of like, you know, trying to create some variation within the colors. So let's look at what's tweaked in the map now. So if I go down here, for the specular itself, there's no tweaks whatsoever. So exposure is set at default 0, alpha gain is at 1, alpha offset is at 1 as well. And this one I think has some color, so I just kept it this way, but if it was just like black and white, I would keep like probably like alpha is luminous, and that's it. And let's see the other stuff. So the effects, I don't have anything. Sometimes I invert the map, depending on what I want to achieve, right? You can invert if it's anything that it's black becomes white and vice versa if you click this button here. That's not what I'm using. UV coordinates is just the default stuff. Arnold, yeah, just the auto generate TX textures is off, and that's about it. So there's nothing fancy about the specular map. So if you have a similar specular map like that one I have in my viewport in ZBrush, and those values here, you should be able to get something similar. So let's go back to transmission. I don't have anything because it's not a transparent object, or I'm not using anything to make any part transparent, right? I mean, like I could maybe like potentially try to use a little bit of the content of that membrane between the eyelid and the eyeball, but I'm not gonna use that. I mean, like you can do all kinds of crazy stuff if you wanna go really far with it. And then, so the next one here is the subsurface, which is the one that matters almost like the most here. So the weight's cranked all the way to 1. So basically, like even if you have anything assigned here, any color, like all this stuff here is going to be ignored. So if you have green in here, it doesn't matter, right? If you have, you know, it's like a weight here, it doesn't matter. Now, if you start bringing this one down, this slider here, that's going to start automatically mixing with whatever's in the base in there. And then you're going to introduce the color and mix with the diffuse pass, right? But that stuff's not going to matter right now. So for the settings I'm using here, I go like, depending on the model, I go from 115 all the way to 150, right? And I keep measuring like, okay, I do a couple of renders, and I do close-up renders, so like very close to the eyes, so I can see how it's scattering in the eyelids because it's a thin surface, right? and then I do like a full on, like full face and shoulders, and then I go back and do another zoom, and I can actually evaluate what's actually working, you know, it's like within the distance. In her case, I actually decided to keep around 125, which is lower than a lot of stuff I do normally, because I thought it was getting a little bit too scattery in her case specifically. Maybe like with the older people, because they have so many folds and all that stuff, you can actually have like a higher value in there. Everything looks a little bit more jello kind of, you know. But in her case, because the surface is quite smooth and the eyelids is smooth as well, so this one worked best for my taste visually, right? Everything I do is like, it's more like visual. It's the kind of like a preference I have. Sometimes it's not like I'm looking at constant references of skin and stuff like that. I do it because it feels like good for my own taste, but not necessarily trying to reach like a level that complete realistic or anything like that, which is like I think is a little wrong, because I should be looking at more references instead of like just trusting, you know. But that's kind of like the way I work. And then for the anisotropy, I'm cranking just like 0.1 in here, because this is actually adding some front scattering. If you go negative, is back scattering. If you go positive, you're adding more front scattering. Random walk to.
Excuse me. Did you put ambient occlusion in your radius?
Oh, let's check. We're gonna open all of those. Yeah, let's go one by one. So this is basically what I have for the base in here. So let's go to the subsurface color now. So for the color, I have that node plugged. That's the remap color, right? Which is like the one from Maya. So if you go to Maya utilities, you have like down here, remap color right there. So that's the node I'm using. It's not that Arnold node. It's actually a Maya node. So basically, like I'm plugging that one in there. So if you don't have it plugged, that's basically like you're gonna have like a little checker icon like this. You're gonna click the checker, and then you're gonna pick from the list. You're gonna pick like that guy, right? You're gonna pick this remap color. So once you have the remap color in here, then this one is gonna have another one checker right here, and that's where you're gonna plug your map. So you're gonna click expand and then pick like the file and point to the path where the file is. So so for the skin color itself, right, what we are doing here, I'm actually keeping, in this case here, the red. I did a little bit of the opposite of what I was doing before. Before I had the skin color from the albedo in a certain level, right, that came straight from ZBrush. And I was actually desaturating. I was bringing down this middle value here, so removing some of the red and introducing more of the blue. And then keeping the green at the base, like a stationary at the middle. So this one was like 0.5. This one was actually 0.4 something, like 4. I don't know. I don't remember exactly. And then this one here was higher, so it was probably like 5 something. If you look at the previous view, you're probably gonna see that. But the thing is, like when I was looking at her references, like in terms of the overall color of her face, it looked like in general she was more pale than what I thought, you know. And sometimes it can be deceiving as well, because you're going to see a person in different stages of her life, right? And then sometimes you're going to see someone who tans a lot, and then you know, it's like at some point the person looks more tan, but then you look at the person, you know, it's like after a couple of months, you know, it's like in the winter, right? And you're going to see a very pale skin. So in her case, I actually opted to go a little bit more pale like this, really like pale skin. And then in order to do that, I actually cranked those values. So I kept instead of like bringing the red down, I kept the red in the middle, and then I brought up the other one. So I did the opposite. So I actually cranked the blue to 0.7 and the green to 0.6, and then I kept this one. Basically, like it created like a gradient, right? Because what I have in terms of color here in ZBrush, it looks like this, right? Which is quite orange in comparison to something like, let's just put it to the side here. So if I bring this one around here and I bring the ZBrush to the side, see, like it's a very orange map in comparison to that, right? So that's why I'm using the node to control how much I want to do it. Another option would be like to repaint a lot of stuff to get the more pale version of it, right? But I actually like having the option of having something that's a little bit more neutral. So if I feel that's too pale now, I can actually go very slowly and every single render just bring a little bit more of the redness back. by actually, you know, it's like keep this one the way it is and just reduce the blue levels and reduce a little bit of the green levels. So next render, for example, if I want to try, I can go to like 580 here and maybe like 680 here, and then get a little bit like slowly more tan than the pale version that I created. So this is actually, it's very flexible for you guys to play with those things, you know, make the skin more pale or bring it, make everything darker, you know. So that's why I use this node. So for the color map, like this is, we're still talking about the color of the subsurface scattering. So I have the regular maps in here coming straight from ZBrush, which should look a little bit more orange, right? Like this. This is straight from ZBrush. And then if I go down here, there's nothing changed. So basically, like that's the exposure is 0, no offsets, no alpha gain, no nothing. And Arnold, again, like you're gonna have the auto generate TX off, and that's about it. So there's no tweak whatsoever for the color map, other than this, right? This is the node I use to tweak the coloring. Now, if you go back and you look at the radius, that's when I'm adding that ambient occlusion that Hansa was actually asking for. So what I did here, oh, actually, I removed it completely. I forgot to put it back, actually. So this render here doesn't show the ambient occlusion yet. So yeah, I might have to add it just to get a little bit darker around those little, although it's looking kind of okay here. So I might actually try it or not, but at least I have it plugged in there. So the way you do it, let's go back to this guy. So you just like click you're gonna have the little checker in here, right? So if you don't have anything plugged, you're gonna click the little checker, you're gonna pick this node here. So under the Arnold shader, the first one is AI ambient occlusion. So that's what you're gonna plug in there. So you're gonna select that one, it should plug automatically. And then when you go inside of the shader, you're gonna have control like for the spread, how much you're gonna go far, you know, it's like the samples, if it's too little, it's getting a little noisy, especially if it's something connected to the ambient, to the subsurface scattering. If you have too little samples, this is the default 3, you might get some artifacts, you know. So you take a look, if you're rendering like a higher resolution of your renders later, you might have to crank this a little bit more, maybe like 5 or 6, just to get the nicer diffuse. And obviously here, in this case, I'm using both white and black with the same color, which is that color that's suggested by Arnold, which is like 1, 0.35, and 2. If you consider RGB is 0 to 1. And then for the black, I'm using the same color. So basically, like I'm not producing any effect here, but the node's there. So once I have those both in place, I can start playing with the blacks and try to go lower here. Around here in the middle, it's already very dark. You know, it's like it doesn't look like, it looks like the color is very similar, but you know, it's like if it's plugged this way, it's already very dark. So it's almost like you have to use something like, say, like maybe like 70, 75%, and then you should get a little bit more darkness within the cavities, but without turning completely black, right? And compromising the whole effect of skin, right? That you want to do something like that. At this point, I'm not playing with the spread or the far clip. And I think what I have to do is actually just like create like a basic shader, or just plug the ambient occlusion shader straight away to the model, or a copy of the model, and just like visually just look exactly what it's doing, because at this point I'm just like plugging it blindly, and it's producing a nice effect, but I'm not controlling, like fine tuning just yet, right? So feel free to play with those values here, but that's basically what I did for the ambient occlusion. I wouldn't get too much, you know, it's like too dark with this guy. I wouldn't go like this. It would turn like completely black in there. So something around like between the middle, all the way like 70, 75%, that should give you like a nice subtle variation to kind of like kill a little bit of the subsurface scattering within the tight cavities, like the folds of the eyelids, for example. It's a great spot to observe that effect. So let's go back here to the shader. So that's basically takes care of the subsurface. And then for the code, so the code is basically, it's a copy of my specular map. So if you look around here, code, so it's plugged all the way up here. And if you look at the map that's plugged, it's basically the same specular map, right? Same thing we looked before. And then based like sRGB, there's no tweaks in here. I'm just using like the alpha is luminance in this case here because the specular, it kind of demands that you use that, otherwise you basically like you don't see the effect. So I'm using the alpha as luminous. I can actually tweak this sliders here, so just like to get the effect a little bit more like create an offset, so the overall look looks more specky. You know, it's like you can, for example, like you can play with exposure here if you want something to really crank the whiteness of the speck, right? But then,
Chris?
yes.
Sorry, this might be a stupid question, but what exactly is alpha luminance doing?
Yeah, it basically like
I've never been sure of that.
Yeah, if you have a black and white map normally, right? And if you're plugging to a node, like you know that Maya sometimes when you're trying to plug like different nodes into different channels, and sometimes it opens like this pop-up that says like, okay, how you want to connect this? Because it's not a straight connection. It's not, for example, like if you want to plug like a bump map, right? You can just plug like a black and white map and plug straight away. But depending on how you're plugging other types of maps, sometimes like you are offered to click like, okay, how you want to connect this? And if you click like all the channels at the same time, it doesn't open the option to click to connect to different types of nodes. So sometimes you have to do like I did yesterday, for example, like click the red channel and then be able to plug in something. So what this one does is basically like if you have an RGB map sometimes, especially like the plugged into the specular channels like this, if you plug like just like a regular map that's like a black and white, but it's basically like Maya's interpreting as an RGB map, sometimes it doesn't produce the effect. So the alpha luminance basically like certifies that you're using like a black and white map, and then the control, instead of being created like by using the color gain, color offset, you basically transfer those two attributes down here. So those ones stop working, and basically like the alpha gain offset basically start controlling everything. So I would say like it's mostly for black and white maps, you know, it's like in those channels like specular, things like that. That's basically how where you're gonna use it, you know. Now if it's just like albedo and things that have color in it, so basically you don't use this alpha luminance.
Thank you. Sorry, that totally makes sense. Thank you so much.
No problem, man. Yeah. And then so color effects that don't have anything. Again, like you can invert the effect, right? Like if you're creating a map that you painted the opposite, right? For example, if you did like for whatever reason, right, you can just invert in here. So sometimes I use that node. And then Arnold, again, just the auto generate. So, but the basic thing here is that I'm not changing anything. Actually, I'm changing the exposure. I'm sorry, I missed that one. So I'm actually cranking the exposure from 0 to 1. So this one is actually helping to increase the overall specularity of the coat map. So basically, like if by default, apparently what I had, so the secondary spec, it was not strong enough. So you can see the primary specularity here at the tip of the nose and a little bit in this area. But everything else, everything that looks diffuse, like a very broad kind of spec, it's almost like a Fresnel kind of thing, that's coming from the coat, right? So that's the thing that the coat is doing. So let's do like a little quick test here. So let's save her. Just to make sure we have that saved. I think she is saved in there. Cool. Yeah, so we can actually play with this. So let's say if we have an area like this one here. So let's do a little quick render here. So let's play with this, with the exposure. So I'm gonna reduce to 0, which was the default. Oh man, I don't have the same angle. I changed a lot. So let's see. Actually, is it the same? Is it the same? That's weird. It doesn't look like the same. Let's see if I can just go back in time here a few times. I think maybe this is the angle. No, that's not it. Interesting. I don't know now. I wish I had saved it so we can actually compare 1-to-1. Yeah, is that the one? No, no. Side. This one? That doesn't look like it. Let's just check here. No, that's too big. Anyway, so let's just get like one area here. We can just render just a specific one. So let's try to find the cheeks in here, around here. So basically, like by default, let's do that one. That's supposed to be the cheeks right there. So by default, just with the regular map plugged in there, without without me cranking the. Let's click this one again, and just go back to our shader network, or actually just go to the shader network itself. So let's see this one, specular, this one here. So let's go back. Where is it? Right here. So exposure is at 0 now, right? So right there. So let's move this one away. And at 0, I'm getting that type of result. See, there's some little specks in there, but like the broad speck that's coming from the code is not quite good. It's not showing a lot. So let's store the snapshot and let's crank this one like to 5, something like that. So you see like how much brighter it is. It's like a very, very broad speck. So basically like the way I control this, before I do any renders with HDRI, I try the renders with just with that flashlight that I show you guys how to do it, which is just like an area light, like a small circular area light. And I try to get the effect of like a kind of like a flashlight, because that way I can see exactly how much when the light hits the skin, how much it expands. You know, it's like how broad it's the speck and how intense it is in comparison to the actual specular. So that's why I normally like start with a scene without any HDRI maps, and then I try to nail that first, and then next I start plugging a combination of both. So this one has both, has the flashlight combined with the HDRI, right? So this one here, now if you compare, look at that. This is the one with a very strong exposure, so at 5, and this one with 0. So basically, like I just used to control it, right? This one is actually interesting is because it's actually revealing the wrinkles in there. They're coming from her eye, the size of the eye, and you cannot see that much in here. They're kind of like start blending because there's not enough speck. But I might have gone a little bit too far with its speck. You know, it's like maybe it's a little bit too soft, but it looks kind of good because this HDRI here environment, it's a little broad, but maybe a tiny bit more. You know, it's like maybe instead of 1, I can use maybe like 1.2 or something like that. But I mean, it's gonna be dependent of your model, obviously. But that's basically what I'm doing there. So let's see, going back. So the parameters here, other than the color, with a little tweak of the, you know, cranking the how you call the exposure a little bit. I'm actually using roughness of 0.400, so it's very, very broad, right? So it's kind of like the specular is very broad compared to the main specular that's just 120, right? So 120 for the main, 400 for the secondary spec, and then here, let me just cancel this. And then here for the index of refraction is the default 1.55. I could potentially, you know, it's like if I want to create like a stronger effect, I can actually leave this one at 0 like I had before in there, and I can actually just crank the index of refraction and add like 2.5, for example, right? If you do that, you're gonna get a similar effect. It's gonna get things much shinier that way. So it's like, you know, it's like a matter of what's your intention, right? Now there's one thing I noticed is that if you plug the specular map, like for the spec itself, under the color in here, it creates one effect, right? And under weight, it might create a slightly different effect. But when it comes to the coat itself, this is a very different effect. You see that I plugged the coat in here, the maps I plugged under the weight instead of the color. Because if I plug them under the color, it takes on almost like the coat itself becomes black, right? So if you have like a black and white map, everything is gonna turn kind of blackish, and then you're gonna have some spots that look a little bit whiter. And it can create a very interesting effect, actually. I can show you what it does here. Let's do as a test. So let's get this guy here, so you can see exactly what type of effect it creates. So let's get this guy, skin shader, and let's get this one. So the spec for the coat, right? This one is plugging the coat. Let's get it plugged into the color as well. Let's get the, see, like I have out alpha, that's the thing you're talking about before. This one, the alpha is plugged into the coat, but the out color is not plugged into it, right? So that's why I'm using the alpha is luminance, right? That's basically what it's doing. But now I can use the color in here, and I can plug the color channel. Let's see, under the color here. Let's see the difference in render now, what it's gonna do. Let's just click this guy here. So that's gonna produce a different result. I don't think it did anything because I have to refresh the scene. So let's see if it's not gonna take forever. Let's try to update the full scene. But in general, when I tested this thing, I mean, like it looked very, very different, you know. Like you can really play with those values and create those interesting effects, you know. It's almost like you get like a wider skin where the specular is really hitting it, and then it gets like a blacker skin in the areas that are not the specky, you know. So you create this kind of like weird effect. It looks like almost like someone with two skin colors at the same time. So let's see if it's gonna work here. Although what I did here, I actually plugged the exact same map, and that exact same map has the tweak in the exposure. So I don't know if it's gonna produce exactly the effect I'm looking for, but if it's not, then I can just like bring it down. But I mean, I'm doing this just like out of fun, just to show you guys the difference between the two. But in general, you're gonna plug that map, the specular map, under the weight, not under the color. That's the whole point of I'm trying to make. So let's see, it's still thinking about it a little bit. It's like reloading all those maps. Okay. So let's go back here and let's explore the rest of the maps while it's thinking about it. So the code, that's basically what I have plugged. Obviously, for the color, you're going to remove this later. I just plug in here just for fun, but let's see what it's going to do. And then the shin, I'm using a tiny little bit just because Arnold's manual says like just use a little bit of shin, so I can create this fake kind of like a peach fuzz effect. So you create like a Fresnel effect, you know, it's like if you go kind of like in a glancing angle, you can see a little bit of that. It looks like a little peach fuzz. But this shin is just to, you know, it's like it's a hack for creating velvet and satin kind of effects. So if you have like a piece of cloth, you can use this one. You can create like a very nice like satin effect, you know, it's like you can use the color like, let's say like pink or purple, you know, and create this weird effect that looks exactly like satin. Actually, under the presets here, if you go to your presets under the AI standard surface, there's a bunch of stuff you can pick from here, right? I don't know if you ever noticed, but you know, like you're probably gonna have satin here somewhere, or velvet, like velvet here. So if I click this one and I click replace, basically it's gonna reset the whole shader, and then I should be able to get like something around the shin in here, probably gonna be a little different than what I have, because that's basically what's gonna be using. So yeah, it didn't change much in there. Look at that. Even reloading the map, I think it's because I'm actually cranking this effect right here. It's the exposure. Let's see what happens if I put like at 0. Is it gonna change at all? Weird. So weird, because I remember in the past like doing this and create this very weird effect just by having it in there. But it's not doing much. I mean, okay, let me just remove it. Skip it 1, and then I can just remove whatever I added here as fun, for fun. I'm just gonna break it. That's basically what we had before. So the color is gonna be white. And yeah, it's interesting, right? Like from white here, if I bring all the way to black, look at what happens right there. So the coat goes black where the specular is. So that's kind of like the thing that I was looking for, trying to test just now. But I wanted to get the opposite effect. So I probably would have to reverse that map, like plug it with the, you know, and then you would get this type of effect reversed. So like I said before, where you have the specular, you probably would have something, you know, it's like it would be like white, and then you're going to be like a very dark skin around the other areas. But yeah, that's what I was talking about. So, but obviously using the same map is not going to give me the same effect, apparently. So, and then for the shin, that's it. Emission, nothing. Thin film, nothing. It's not transparent. Geometry, I'm using the AI noise for the micro breakup. So the AI noise you can find under Arnold. So it's gonna be Arnold texture. So the first one here is the cell noise. Actually, I'm using the AI noise, not the cell noise. What's up with that? I don't know why I use the AI instead of like the cell noise. Let's see what is plugged in here. Huh, interesting. Coordinate split, I'm using like mode vector. That's not normally what I do. It's interesting. I don't know if I switched the node for whatever reason. I'm just using a regular noise now. But in the past, I would use the cell noise. That's what I did like the previous class, if you watch. That's basically what I used. And they create a very interesting effect because it has this crocodile. I'm going to click in here just to show you. So like if you go to pattern noise, they have like this one, alligator actually, alligator. And this one here, you can actually play with the values. I think it's the class of June. You can actually take a look when I mentioned this stuff. And I give like all the settings for it. I think it was Jason Hill actually, he came up with this and he told us and I tried and it worked really nicely. So that's the one I was using. I'm actually surprised I don't have it plugged on her model here. But I think I'm gonna do this tonight actually to get a better result. But you know, like that's why I don't think it's worth me talking about how my bump stuff is plugged in here. Because I mean, I don't think this is the node that I'm actually using at the end, you know. So I think, yeah, if I plug it tonight, I can show you the settings tomorrow. You know, it's like exactly what I did because I'm gonna have to do a couple of renders without the shaders themselves, or just like that test that you guys showed me how to do. You know, it's like just to bring it down. But I'm gonna have to test and see if it's playing nicely with the displacement. So probably gonna copy all the settings from the model from last month, and I can pass that to you guys. But that's basically what's plugged on my my bump map, right? The bump height. So that's basically like bump mapping. I plugged it in here. Like I said, like instead of the AI noise, but I normally use the cell noise. So like forget about what I just showed you guys in there. And then if we expand it, you go back, then that's basically plugged in the value itself. But then you need the depth, right? So you need to plug something to the bump depth. So that's where that map is coming. This one here. That's coming from straight from ZBrush as well. Right? Super simple, which is exactly this one here. That's the bump height. And then, so it's plugged in there. And then I'm cranking the exposure a lot. So by default, it's actually not doing much with the bump itself. So I had to crank it a lot, but it's because my painting here is very, very faint, right? Like it looks very, very dark overall. If you do a painting that's actually, you know, has more contrast between the, you know, it's like overall, like between the blacks and whites and everything overall goes a little lighter, then you probably are not gonna need to have too much exposure going on in here. This one as well is using the alpha, right? So let's look at here. For example, the bump height, you can see right there. So that's the alpha. Out alpha is not the out color, right? So in that case, if the out alpha is plugged, that's when you're gonna have to use the alpha as luminance in here. And in this case here, the alpha color is being used, but this one is just for the AI noise, right? So, and the rest of the node here is basically the same, it's like 1 and alpha is luminous, but this is the important one. If you have a dark map like I have, but it's gonna be dependent of how you painted it, right? In my case, I had to compensate it. And then nothing else. I mean, like that's all it is for the rest of the shader. And then that's about it. So let's see, advanced in here. I don't have caustics or internal reflections. I normally save those just for the eyes. And that's basically it. That's the entire shader network for the skin. And as you can tell, I mean, like it's just a few nodes, right? A couple of ones in here just to remap the color and some ambient occlusion experimental in there. But then other than that, in terms of the maps themselves, I have the spec plugged in both specular and then coat. So like in 2 spots. I have the bump height to help with the breakup of the AI noise or the AI cell noise, which is going to be updated tonight. And then I have this one plugged as the color itself for the albedo. And then this one here is the displacement map. So I have like a total of like 1, 2, 3, 4 maps, basically like just 4 maps, and one of them is a duplicate of the other one, which is the spec in the code. So like basically like 4 maps plus the procedural AI noise. That's all it is. Like it's a super simple shader network. And then, I mean, if I need to tweak stuff and add more stuff to increase the realism later on, I can totally do that. But for now, it's actually working fairly nicely for what I want. You know, it's like it's convincing enough. But then I can do a lot with, like, for example, like my painting the albedo color a little better to push the realism a little bit further, you know. And then if stuff is not like still not working, then I might start studying, like, for example, okay, do I need like an actual subsurface map to control, for example, like the eyelids to be a little bit more scattered than the rest, or overall that's looking okay, you know. And for all my previous renders, it normally turns out that they look pretty okay. You know, it's like Arnold does a good job actually evaluating those thin areas and creating an effect that's very convincing, you know, especially with the random walk 2, this new algorithm that they have. It's actually much nicer. Is that helpful for you guys? Like, I mean, like that's the whole breakdown of the shader.
Can I see your teeth shader?
Oh, the teeth, yes, let's do that. The teeth is another thing that I was just looking at her, for example, and she was sitting right here in front of me today. I told her, you know what, it looks good enough, but there's so much stuff that I cannot see in the pictures, but I can see in you when you're sitting right here with me. For example, like the bridge of the nose. In the pictures, I always had the impression that this was a little wide in here. But when I look at her nose, like in person right in front of me, this area is a little narrower. But what happens is that she has this fading into the eyes in here. It's a very smooth transition, and it's very wide transition. So instead of like having this wall here that goes pretty fast in terms of transition, I have to actually start the transition around here. So basically I make this entire part here a little thinner, narrower, and then the fall off actually goes much smoother, you know. It's like it's a smoother transition. But it's the kind of stuff you don't see just looking at pictures, you know. So that's kind of cool that you have someone you can actually look at. That's the first for me, because all my subjects, I just like look at crappy pictures from the internet, and then it's very hard to evaluate. But then again, like about the teeth, I was looking at her teeth today, and she has like those little areas, for example, around here and here, they're more transparent. Because you have to you know, if you get like a prosthetic teeth, for example, and you look at the back, for example, if it was a cast from an actual person, in the back of your teeth, you have those cavities, right? Like you have like those little holes in there. And then they normally match like the cavities in the front as well. So for example, like you're gonna have those you know, like little creases in here in the front, right? You're gonna have some, you know, carving to do in there. But then in the back of them, you have a similar kind of effect as well. So it's almost like you have the front teeth here split like maybe like in 1, 2, 3 forms. So you have those ones. So right here where you have them thinner against the back, right? Like the back's gonna be thinner against this one. So like the entire surface gets thinner. So in her teeth, I could see more transparency right there. And then in my case, I have like a transparency map. It's kind of like making everything kind of like fading into transparency completely at the tip. But if you look at the references, for the most part, it goes transparent around this area here, and then it gets a little bit more solid. And sometimes it gets a little bit more like a kind of like a whitish, a little bit more, how can I say that? It's not so scattery, you know, it's like it's a little bit more solid at the very edges. So I have ways of doing this with the maps as well. So my intention is to actually do a little tweaking here, maybe tonight even, to actually tweak the teeth from behind. So I'm gonna do this. Let's see the teeth the way it looks like right now, which was never finished, by the way. It's just like this constant thing. I just changed the front of it to look kind of cool for the portrait, but it's not something I really pushed yet in terms of like getting the anatomy of the teeth perfect, right, or anything like that. Oh, look, there's an artifact in there. There's something that happened. I'm gonna have to clean that up. Look at that. There's a line in there. So I did like some anatomy work in the teeth, but it's not something like, you know, perfect or anything like that. So that's basically what I'm talking about right here. You see, like I have like those areas carved to make a little hollow in there. So in comparison, you know, it's like if you look at this against the front of the teeth, probably gonna have to add, like, make those cavities and those carving areas here a little bit deeper, and then increase some transparency in there as well. So around this area, I can paint a transparency map. So let's see the transparency map I have at this point. It looks like this. So you see, like, it's super simple, right? It's just like a simple, very stupid gradient. That's like, it's not gonna reflect like an actual real tooth, right? In the case of the real tooth, in her specific case, I'm gonna have to actually bring this one. I assume I don't have the reference right here on my side from Palomita, but I'm gonna have to bring this color black around here, more towards the middle of this area, around here and here, just to make the transparency more around those areas. And then at the very edge of the teeth, I'm gonna bring back white. So I'm not gonna have a ton of transparency right there. So that's the tweak I have to do. But in terms of what I have at this moment, that's the map I'm using, you know, super simple. And it's just like creating more transparency around the edges, which it should not be what I was doing. I was wrong, right? Because I was not observing enough. But basically, like, this transparency is gonna happen more like in the middle in here. And it's gonna get transparent around this area, don't get me wrong. But when you get the very tips in here, it's probably gonna get a little bit less transparent. So this is a very simple map, and I'm using it in combination with this map here, which is the albedo, that I painted using those that little lightning brush that I show you guys, that I captured the lightning from the internets. And then let's just do like a preview in here. And I just added a lot of them around here just to create these micro veins. And also, you see, like, it's a very crappy paint job right now when it comes like to the edge of the teeth. I'm painting manually. And then you can see that the most successful ones are those ones here, this one and this one, because this one is the one, if you remember when I mentioned the topology, is the only ones have a correct topology. So basically, like, this is going inside right here. So basically, like, there's an overlap. The gums are overlapping the teeth. But those guys here don't have that. So my intention is to actually get this blue area and tuck it in underneath and then bring the gums on top of it. That way it's going to be much easier to select stuff based on topology. And also because everything is in polygroups, right? So I can actually isolate exactly what I want. So that's going to be the plan, to turn those guys into something like this. That's going to be a next step. So now that we have the color and the transparency, let's look at the shaders. So let's look at the teeth here. Look at that guy. And I mean, like, if you look at the teeth, you know, from a distance like this, it works in the context of the portrait and everything. But if you compare the teeth with an actual teeth, you know, it's not that realistic. You know, it's like there's a lot of room for pushing it more realistic. And the same goes for everything else. You know, it's like if you really start looking at stuff, you can actually push every single aspect a little further, you know, or a lot further. In general, this is like, it's a good experiment to show that how, like, putting a good combination of efforts, you can get a nice result at the end. But there's a lot of room for, like, improvement. All more portraits, like from likeness, I never liked the likeness of most of my portraits. And I always have this plan of revisiting them, but then I start a new class and I never do. But now I'm going to have like 2 months break. So I'm probably going to revisit all my models and try to come up with different versions, maybe posed and stuff like that. But enough of talk. Let's talk about the teeth. So let's go to the base. Base has stuff plugged in there. But again, like, if the subsurface here is at 1, that's basically gone. You don't need anything plugged in there. I keep this one plugged. Normally, I plug the same map as a buffer, right? So I have the same map teeth in there plugged. Because if I want to go and try to mix like subsurface scattering with something a little bit more diffuse, then I can always use this weight slider just to control the blend between this and that map, right? So that's why I keep it as a buffer. For the specular, I'm using like very little spec, so 0.1, which is almost nothing. It's very sensitive. I feel that she needs a little bit more specular, but it's impressive. Like every time I put a different map, like an HDRI map, sometimes like it really pops super shiny. It doesn't look that realistic. And so I'm kind of like, again, like trusting my flashlight to get a little bit of the result I want. But I might have room to increase a little bit, maybe like 0.15, so 150 here would do a better effect. But that's what I have if you're interested in the shader, the current stage of the shader. And then the roughness is very mirror-like, right? It's just like 0.15. And I'm actually breaking the look of the mirror by having some detail we sculpted in the teeth, like this. Right? So it's not like super detailed, but you can see there's a little bit of a noise effect in there. And also some of those cavities carved into it. And I have room to make it deeper. If you look at like prosthetics again, like someone's cast of the teeth, sometimes you see those cavities very deep, much deeper than you think. And then when you have like a lot of scattering, that's basically what happens with teeth, then it kind of goes away, you know, it's like you don't see this that much. So even in this case here, I have plenty of room to actually really carve those forms a little deeper to actually represent a nicer breakup instead of like, you see how smooth they look like? I can actually introduce more breakup if I carve it deeper. Index of refraction default is 1.55. There are no maps plugged in the specular, at least not yet. The shader is basically like the same shader across the board for teeth and gums. It's a lazy way of doing it, I know, but I can control that if I have interest to do so with a map. It can be like a black and white map that I can, you know, control the weight, not the weight, because the weight they're gonna keep scattering anyway. But I mean, like I can even try like the radius to have like different colors for the radius, and then maybe the subsurface color as well. You know, it's like just actually the subsurface color is going to be the same because that's what it is. But probably the radius I have room to play with some maps if I want to split things out. Transmission. So before I go to subsurface, let's talk about transmission. I have depth in here. It's like 6.452. It's the kind of stuff, you know, it's like that I cannot tell you like why I'm using this. Basically, like visually, I was rendering like a close-up of the teeth alone. And I was like playing with those sliders. And I was like, oh, this actually looks more interesting. The extra roughness is basically what adds the milky transparency, right? So if you have a transparency that's like a mirror, not mirror, like a glass kind of transparency that's completely transparent, you can make it milky looking by actually using extra roughness. And you can do that. So since we have the scene here, it's all saved. Maybe you can play with this a little bit just to show you what it does. Let's see. Let's just isolate my light, the teeth, and the HDRI. Something like that. And then let's do a little render, and we can play with those values just to explore what it actually does.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Richard was asking is there a reason why you model the teeth together as one object? Is it to get better scattering at the end?
Yeah, I mean, like I think in the past I did a lot of the regular way of just doing the teeth separate from the gums, and I thought it was a good test. You know, it's like to see the advantages I would have doing this way. And the first one I can think of is just like, you know, it's like painting maps and stuff like that. It's just like one straight pass. The second one is like there is no artifacts with concerning scattering. In the past, at least like before I used Arnold and everything, like trying with other stuff, I always had like some kind of like darker areas showing up in the connection between in the overlap between the two surfaces. I know for a fact that RenderMan has that problem as well. I don't know how the current state is, but for the longest time, if you have like the teeth placed inside of the gums in there, you would have some kind of artifact that would happen as well. So I kind of like, you know, let me try to do like a simple solution that actually can work for my models. And that's basically what I came up with, you know. It's like, and it's not something that I came up with. It's something that I observed some other artists creating some amazing effects, you know, like with teeth. Some of the best CG teeth I've seen so far was created this way, you know. And then I was just like, oh, let me buy into the hype train here and try to do the same. And actually, I like the result, you know. So that's why I kept using it. That's the explanation I have. But I mean, like I said before, I mean, like, you guys are free to test anything. If you do it with separate teeth, just make sure that when you go to the model itself, click the model, make sure that you have that little attribute that's under Arnold in your object attributes. just make sure you have, first, obviously, the opaque here has to be off, so you can actually have transparent shadows if that's the case. But also that you have this SSS set name, basically the same name, it doesn't matter what name you pick, is set for all the objects involved. So if you have the teeth, like each one of the teeth separate, for example, you're gonna have to set this up to each one of them separate. If you have all together, set them up as well. And then for the gums, you set the same name as well. Based on that screenshot I show you guys, the past one of those classes, that basically like looking at the Arnold online manual, if you just search like for Arnold SSS or like Arnold 5 SSS, you're gonna get to this page that they talk about all the parameters of the SSS. And down there they have an option, an example that shows like this object that's made out of like cylinders in a sphere. And then if you have the set name basically like matching all the objects, you're gonna get a result which is basically like a nice blend between everything. And then if you don't have it, you're gonna get some dark areas where they connect. So you know, it's another, you know, maybe it would work fine if I had this matching for all the objects, but to me it was just like, it's an exploration. Let me try to do this way. And I'm actually liking, it's super easy to tweak stuff, you know. If you have the teeth separate, I mean, like there's a lot of stuff you cannot do with it when it comes like to, you know, it's like being fast to model things all together, gum and teeth. But obviously have advantages as well, right? Like, you know, it's like painting maps and things like that. Maybe everything's completely separate and you're not gonna have this trouble I'm having here, just like painting things manually, just because I don't have a nice topology to create some overlapping, you know. But it's a matter of like, I guess, a personal preference. I'm liking it, so. Let's see, so let's see what we were doing here before. Let's explore that little shader, like that little node. So let's see transmission. So let's do something here. Let's make it completely like the extra roughness. Let's just save this value here. Let's make it 0. And just select like maybe this area around here. It's probably not going to produce a lot of difference in there, but let's say this one down as well. This one actually, I think the effect that I was looking for was actually in combination with the extra roughness before. It's hard to see in here. I mean, like if you have something completely transparent, I'm afraid like to mess up with the stuff too much. And then let's finish what I was talking about the shader first, and then I'm gonna mess up with it because I want to pass you guys the same exact same amount values that I have right now before I go too crazy with the messing up with the shader. So let's see, specular transmission. So I was in transmission, and then basically like those are the values I'm using, like 679 for whatever reason, scatters anisotropy as well, and then the depth. So, and then for the map itself, I'm using that crappy ZBrush map, which is like very simple. That was painted in 5 minutes, literally. Right, I just test the effect, and I ended up like using on Stan Winston, and that stuck, you know, with it. And then some people look at those things and they say like, "Oh man, that doesn't look too realistic." Those teeth, yeah, it was painted quite fast, dude. I mean, like it's a work in progress, you know. But I post them, you know, it's like, and people can react the way they want. You know, but that's what it is. All this stuff is work in progress. And then here for the map itself, what I'm doing, I'm actually tweaking the alpha gain. So this is important one. I'm using alpha as luminous as well. So you're gonna see the difference in here. If I have a default coming straight from ZBrush, right? Let's look at what it does. It's completely transparent. So basically what I'm doing, if I'm bringing this alpha gain down, I'm turning everything more blend. So like whatever was black in there is gonna turn more white towards the beginning here, because I'm using the invert control. So basically like everything that was black in that map, which is like the edges in here, turn white, and everything that was white turns black, right? Because that's the way the transparency is gonna work here. So I'm using the invert in this case. And then if that's the case, now if I'm bringing this alpha gain to 1, so that means like this part is completely white and this completely black. So if I bring it down, the gain in here, obviously it's gonna turn more and more white, because it's basically like turn the transparency down, right? So it's kind of like the opposite effect. But you know, if I crank it pretty good like this, it now is a completely transparent teeth, right? So in this case here, if it's a transparent teeth, we can actually play with that. Let's see, with the roughness. 0. So now it's a mirror effect. You can see the refraction in there. It's like it's a complete mirror. If you render all the way through, it's gonna be like a pretty much like a glassy mirror kind of thing, right? But if I crank this one, you're gonna see it getting more and more diffuse and becoming like a milky kind of effect. So obviously it's still very transparent, but you see like all that stuff is kind of gone now. It becomes very rough. So that's what this channel here is doing basically. So if I go back here, let's go back to my map, and I had, instead of 2 here that I just used for playing with it, I had 0.2. That's basically what I found out to be, okay, it's a little bit of transparency, but not that strong, right? So instead of like painting the transparency here very subtle in ZBrush, I actually went to town and I made like a very contrasty map. So because I know I can control that kind of intensity in Maya. So that's what I did. So I'm probably gonna be painting the transparency around here, like I said, very strongly as well, both the front and the back. So I have like a transparent kind of going across the teeth. And then I can just like modulate and see how transparent I can go with it. And then keep the edges in here very much like white. So like no transparency whatsoever. And so let's see the rest of the stuff. So I'm using like the effects invert, 0.2 here, Arnold, that's it. And that's it for the transmission. And then all the other values are already there. You can now actually pause the video later and see that. And then for the subsurface scattering, I'm using full-on subsurface scatter. And then random walk 2, I'm using the scale of 0.2. Remember, like for the skin, it was 0.125. So that's almost like double the subsurface of the skin. That's basically what I'm using for the teeth. It might be too high, but you know, it's like doing those renders back and forth from super close up and then from far away. I came to like 0-200. But as everything with my shaders and everything, I keep trying with different things. Some nights I just go crazy about like tweaking all kinds of stuff. So at the end, I might land into something like, let's say, like maybe between 160, 180 or something like that. I never know. Never know what's going to happen. And then I'm getting a little bit more of a front scatter as well, just like 10% more front scatter. And then, so for the weight, I already spoke about it. Let's talk about the subsurface color, which is the color of the teeth and the gums all painted in the same. So if you look at ZBrush, it's quite yellowish, right? So the teeth is not white. It's quite yellowish. There's a little bit of orange tone in the gums as well. But then looking at references, depending on the person, you know, it's like you might have something like this, or in the case of, you know, it's like Ray Harryhausen, he had very dark teeth, so I had to actually exaggerate that color. But in her case, they go fairly white, and it might be a little bit too white. I might have to actually do a little tweaking to, you know, to bring it down. But the map itself is plugged like this. So that's basically the teeth, and you're gonna see that's the same map with the yellowish teeth and slightly orange gums, right? And then the tweaks are here. So you're gonna see the exposure I'm not tweaking. Since it's the color and not like a alpha, so I'm not using alpha as luminous. This one actually is using the auto generate texture. I'm gonna turn it off because I wanna make sure that's updating every time instead of me having to force the updates every time. And the only thing that I'm changing here, you're gonna see the color gain overall is not like full on. So it's not like using the full range of the color. I'm actually using 90% of the color. So like you can see, like it's not like full white. It's like 0.94. And I'm tweaking it slightly towards blue. So basically I have blue in here. So to fight like a warm color, use blue, right? To fight a blue color, use yellow. So that's basically the way it works with light in general as well. So what I was trying to fight here was actually at the same time increase a little bit more of the bluish tone in the teeth, and then bring the gums more towards pink instead of like orange. So like this, just by shifting a little bit towards bluey here, it helped a little bit with that. But not only that, I'm using a color offset in here. So that means that anytime I go higher with the white channeling here, that means that I'm actually desaturating the whole thing. I'm introducing a white wash on top of everything, right? And so basically, like it's at this point here, I have 20% of, actually not 20%. Yeah, it is. Let's see, 0.021. Okay, so it's going from black, so you can see the change in here. Let's try store it, and let's remove those tweaks. So let's bring this one down to, you're just gonna see this one is already, every time you wanna save a color for use later, you just click on it, then Maya saves at the last spot in there. So I'm gonna do this for this guy and this one just to save a memory. So I have both of them saved. So now I can just go back, and then for the color again, I'm gonna go all the way. So now the teeth is gonna start to get a little bit more yellow, which is the original one that came straight from ZBrush that I mentioned. Let's see if it does a little render in there. That's the comparison. It's taking a little bit, but yeah, you can tell already there's a little bit more of a yellow tone across, especially around here. It's going to be pretty yellow. So that's why I'm using this little tweaks in here, you know. Again, like I said before, like I use a lot of those, either use like a color corrective RGB remap kind of thing that I use for the skin, or I play with the color balance, you know. Even like for HDRIs, for example, like you guys are searching for HDRIs now, and then sometimes you find one that has this beautiful reflection that's just perfect. But then you look at the tone, overall tone of the map, it's like it's super, like it's super warm, right? It's almost like it was taken like with the sunlight blazing through the window or something like that. And then completely, like everything turns yellow, right? So I do this sometimes with the maps, like the HDRI maps as well. I bring them in, and then I shift the color, for example, the color offset and the color gain more towards blue, and I compensate for that super orange tone, and I end up like having some kind of like in between, you know, it's kind of like a whitish kind of version of that. Another thing that some people do, they get like they open the HDRI maps in Photoshop, and they either desaturate the whole thing, or they shift the color, or they just turn the whole thing black and white. And then you can try that as well. You know, it's like if you want something more neutral just to evaluate things, but obviously for something more natural color, like especially outdoors, you're gonna need the color in the map, right? So that's not the kind of stuff you're gonna be doing. But you see, like this is the difference between, yeah, it's not like a huge difference, but you can tell you got a little different in there. Like shifting towards, it's the kind of stuff, again, depending of the type of HDRI map I'm using, I'm gonna see much more difference than what I'm seeing right here. This is when I have the flashlight that's kind of washing things out a little bit, but I'm pretty sure in the past when I had this under a certain HDRI, I could see the difference much bigger than this just by, you know, correcting the color of the offset. So let's go back to this guy. So that's the offset I had, and the default here was this guy. I'm just gonna keep it the way it was. Then let's go back here. So that was the subsurface color, but then I have the radius, and the radius should be pretty much the same map. So let's see. I have the upper teeth in here. Let's just double check if it's the same map. Yep, exact same one with the yellow teeth and orangey kind of gums. And then for the color correction here, I'm using, let's see what I'm doing here. I think I'm shifting this one towards blue. Yeah, see, like it went from white, so like at 0 to 0.116 towards blue. That's basically what I'm doing, just shifting the color of the scatter a little bit. But other than that, it's basically using the albedo color for defining the color of the scatter as well. So basically, like whatever is pink in there, it's gonna turn pink, and whatever is white is gonna turn white, and that's it. Super simple, nothing fancy about it. And then let's see the code. So we have for the transmission subsurface, let's minimize them. And let's compare the code in here with the spec. So for the spec itself, I have 0.1, and for the code 0.11. Again, like probably like just by tweaking things and coming with like minor details, right? You start like with very broad values. You start like, let's say like 180, and then you do a render. It's like, oh, it's too strong. You do like 170. It's like you keep tweaking, and then compensating and going higher with the specular and then going lower with the spec. And at some point I arrived at those two values in here, which are probably very flexible. I can keep tweaking them forever and until you find something that I actually like. So in comparison to the 0.15 for the how specky things are, which is very, very mirror-like look, this one is a little bit more broad than that. So it's not a huge difference, but it's at least like, it's almost like 5 times, right? It's almost 5 times the amount I have for that one. So that means that if the specular is very small like this, so that means like 5 times more. It's probably like a little bit around here. That's going to be like how far it goes with the secondary spec. And then for the index of refraction is basically the same. So like it's just as specky. And so no maps plugged into this one here, at least not at this point. No Shin, no emission, and then probably just geometry. No geometry either. So I'm not using anything. No bumps, no bump maps just yet. And advanced. Okay. So I'm using internal reflections and exit to background. So yeah, I think like I believe like the internal reflections wouldn't be so necessary. I don't think you're gonna see anything. Let's try to turn both off just to see what happens here. I don't even know why I have both of them on. I don't think it's gonna produce a huge difference, to tell you the truth. I think with the eyes, that would cause some difference in there, but because they're not fully transparent, I don't know if it's gonna be marginal, I think, the difference in there. So, you know, either on and off, you decide. And then let's go back here and see if we have any more nodes that we didn't talk about. Let's get this guy. So let's see, coat is covered. So Shin nothing, emission nothing, advanced done. Yeah, that's basically it. That's basically it for the teeth. But again, like I said, like you can use the same settings to get the same result I have right now. But the thing is, like, I don't like the result I have right now. So you have to know that it's a good ballpark. It's something to start with. But all this stuff is very much tweakable. You know, it's like, and I'm pretty sure you guys are going to be able to tweak a lot of it and come up with better results. I'm going to try to do the same on my side, you know. And that's how we struggle together. I mean, like, the whole thing about this class is that it's extra pressure for me as well, right? Because I have to come up with something that looks cool at the end. And I never know if it's going to be possible, you know. It's like you're doing a lot of stuff at the same time and then hoping for the best, you know. It's like it's been such a long time I did like a female model, for example. And we saw all those old dudes, right? And I'm actually inspired to doing the next class, probably like someone like maybe like from a tribe, maybe like some Asian or maybe African, and just like play with different skin tones, you know, and the roughness of the skin as well. Because one thing that I noticed actually, you're talking about this, like someone in the May class mentioned like what happens with like black skin color, right? Like the tone darker, for example, like, or maybe like an Indian guy, right? Like with a very dark skin. So what happens is that the scatter behaves differently. It's like the way that the light propagates inside of the skin is different because of the color of the skin. And it's the funny thing that I never thought about. I was reading some papers when we were looking for that information. I was looking for some papers, and it's like I think like for plastic surgeons or something like that. You know, it's like or cosmetics, something like that. And then there's a part in there they're talking about like the natural skin versus the tan skin, right? So for example, like if you have someone who is naturally tanned, or like someone with a dark skin, right? African, and then you get like someone like with a pale skin, like let's say like an albino, right? An albino person. Like this huge contrast. Actually, the way that the scatter is going to behave is going to be different between the two of them. But not only that. For example, like if you get like an African with like a very dark skin tone, and then you get someone who has a kind of like brownish skin, but got like a super strong tan, right? Like, and then if you compare the two of them side by side, you're gonna see like, okay, they both look like they have the exact same color tone, right? So both colors like very, very dark. And then, but the thing is like one was a natural melanin occurrence, right? Like the African guy, and the other guy had a super strong tan, there's even like a lady that she did this. She's addicted to tanning, and she got like a product or something applied, and she became black basically. You know, it's like with that product. It's kind of funny. It's like this super pale lady that she became black just by using those products and overly tanning herself. It's like very bizarre. You know, it's like she went like overboard. But the thing is, like, there's this difference, you know. It's like, so the skin that's like naturally has a natural melanin, the scattering, like the way the light is going to penetrate, is going to propagate in a certain way. But the other one has a very strong tan. It's basically like the surface of the skin is kind of burned, right? So it's almost like it's going to block a lot of the light rays to penetrate the skin, because it's actually being blocked by this little crust that's at the very top. So that's the funny thing, you know. It's like you're going to see some both people with the same skin tone in theory, right? But one is going to have a different scatter than the other one because of one is natural and the other one is not natural, you know. So that's the kind of like research that's kind of interesting to do, you know. And sometimes, I mean, like if someone questions that, it makes me think about it. And then when I research, I was like, I find those little treasures in there, and that's kind of, it blew my mind, you know. It's like I never thought about that. That even like people with the same skin color might have a different type of subsurface scattering going on. Like the depth should be different, the way that it scatters is different. But I mean, I don't have a formula. It's just like it's something that you can find the information out there, but I don't have a formula to tell, like, okay, so compared to the pale skin, you know, it's like someone with a dark skin, how much I'm gonna have to tweak my scatter, you know. It's something that I'm gonna have to try. And I like those little challenges, you know. So like maybe like in one of the future classes, going to be doing exactly that, trying to challenge myself and try to find a convincing kind of skin tone for a darker skin. So let's see, what else we have to talk about. We spoke about the skin and the teeth. We are going to talk about my approach to sculpting that Andrea was actually asking. So let's see. I mean, like, it's very unusual, right? Like, you
Chris,
notice, hey.
seems like shader is something that we cannot avoid it. It's like math, you know. We cannot avoid it in life, but we're going to have to do it and expert with it.
Yes, exactly, man. And the thing is, like, one approach is to actually have a very scientific approach for everything, right? Like, you can get like a much better looking portrait overall than anything I do by actually using like actual reference for like from papers and things like that, and using blueprints for nailing the likeness like 1-to-1. And the thing is, like, it's kind of like a, I posted this about this like the other day on my Facebook. That's kind of like it's there's no way to get out of that, you know. Once you get to that rabbit hole, then you're screwed, because people are gonna try to pin you and pressure you to produce a super realistic result, right? And I tried to escape that, you know, that trap by doing stuff manually and by actually tweaking the shaders and everything to fit my own style. It's like I like the way things look, even if they don't look completely realistic sometimes. I like the stylization, very slight stylization. You see someone like Ron Mueck, which, you know, is like this amazing sculptor who came like from a family of like toy makers, I believe. Like his family, they used to build toys and things. And you can see like every single one of his hyper real portraits, and because they're called hyper real, they don't look super realistic in a way, right? Because they have all this stylization in the forms, you know. It's like, it's almost like it's this beautifully executed, stylized, realistic work. And that fascinates me, you know. It's like, because there is a little bit of room for wonder in there. In her case, of course, like, I'm trying to get as close as possible because it's someone that's so close to me. But obviously there's a lot I'm doing here that's very much like you know, for fitting my own taste, you know. I'm not nailing every single spot. I'm actually trying to get an overall feeling of this person and trying to capture the soul, basically like making her look alive, you know. That's basically my trio, is to do that kind of stuff. But in terms of like nailing like to the T with every single parameter, you know, it's like you're gonna look at the eyes and all this stuff. Although, like, for this class, we actually went further than the other ones when it comes to the eyes, because I actually tried to represent a little bit closer to reality the structure, right? Like, by creating the cornea with a little thickness and then adding the liquid inside of it and try to emulate that. So that's sort of already a little further than the other ones. But the rest, I mean, like, it's so much like room for for idealization, you know. Of course, like some of the guys watching this video later on, especially those pirates, they are having fun, man, like bashing me in that forum. They are like getting stuff almost for free and then bashing me. But they are complaining that, you know, it's like making fun of all my stuff and that my likeness are never good and stuff like, oh, I'm sorry, guys. Sorry you didn't pay for the class and you're complaining about the likeness. So funny. Anyway, so let's go to the sculpting part. Let's get this one. And then let's get to the face itself. So how do I approach likeness? All right, so that's a very broad one because I think let's get the teeth and the eyes. The eyes look very black in there. So it's hard to describe. I mean, like you saw the time lapse of me how I sculpt. Like I start with the sphere. In this case here, in the past like 2 classes, I actually started from a base model. And the thing about the base model is that our brains tend to get lazy when you start with something that's already kind of built for you. So like if you have a base mesh, either you have to consciously push things. So for example, like you start with the base mesh and like the one I made available to you guys. And if you get too comfortable with it, you know, it's like, for example, like if you start thinking about like, oh yeah, but the nose looks okay enough, you know, it's almost like your brain gets a little lazy and you end up like leaving a lot of clues that the model was actually another model before, especially if you do multiple models starting always from the same model. If you don't push them enough, you always leave like this thing that people can actually identify sometimes and say like, oh, I can tell that you started from that model, you know. But that's the thing, you know, it's like until you learn how to go like brute force with everything. And by brute force, I mean this. In the past, I would have like a base mesh to sculpt my stuff. Like back in the day, I would say like 15 years ago or more. And I would be a little bit careful about how I was pushing the forms. You know, for example, I would have this nice little base mesh in there, and I would be like, okay, but I have to be careful so I don't destroy this nose too much. I'm gonna push just enough just to make it look a little bit like the other one, but without destroying it too much, right? Always concerned about pushing things too small passes, right? Like everything was so small. And then that kind of like it got me a little stuck in a way, you know? And another thing that got me stuck was basically like being too OCD, like you saw me being OCD with the hair the other day, trying to get like a very correct number for them, you know, so kind of like putting a number there to get like a very correct one, like predictably. But I mean, overall, I had to break this pattern of being too OCD with everything, because if I was doing stuff, I would be measuring everything perfectly, and then all of a sudden, like I was being kind of like you know, it's like not being free enough to experiment with stuff. So as soon as I said like fuck it, I'm just gonna push the form as far as I want to, I started like getting better results. You know, for example, like that thing about like being too conservative about tweaking the nose slightly, right? You saw, for example, like if you watched like one of my previous classes, how I was actually conforming my sketch to the model I was about to project to, just like pulling stuff very strongly. You know, it's like you get like a move brush, a very strong one, and a big brush as well, and pull the forms completely. You know, it's like if you're trying to get the likeness, I have like an approach that's a little bit conservative still in a way, because sometimes I build things like in little layers in increments, but sometimes if it's a very different subject, for example, like I go from this face here, I want to build like a monster or something like that, right? I'm gonna really try to go to town with the way that I pull those forms around. I'm gonna try to make sure I touch every single part of the face, so I don't leave anything you know, left in terms of you know, it's like I didn't touch that part because it looked kind of cool, you know. So that's the trap about like starting with the base mesh. Reason why for this class here, you started with the sphere, and you have like the time lapses saved and everything. You can take a look at how I started it. Very free form. If I'm sculpting someone with a smile, for example, I'm gonna try to go like straight to the pose itself. I'm not gonna go and do like a neutral pose and then smile afterwards. That's basically what I do in my daily job if I'm building like a digital double. I have to build a digital double with a neutral face, right? And then obviously we're gonna have to have like a blend shape library, right? We're gonna have all those expressions and different mouth shapes and everything, and cheeks and all that crap. You know, it's like the whole library. Then you're gonna have to at some point generate a smile like this by combining a bunch of different shapes, right? Like to tweak like different areas, like for the furrow and it's like anything, like all kinds of different facial expression shapes you use. But because this is like for portraits, and I want to make sure it's a more like an artistic approach. You saw how I approached like in the first class, I started with the sphere and I went straight to the smile. So that's my main approach, depending on what I want to represent. For example, like I do a research first. If I'm looking for someone to sculpt, like when it comes like to an actor, it's like, I don't even do actors because, I'm more interested in representing people who actually mean a lot to me. It's like those masters I try to portray, and then my wife now, more than actors. But I mean, some actors are cool. I might, go back and do it. I think it's just like, the thing that I have in mind is that a lot of people model like actors because, especially like actors related to very popular shows and things like that, just because it's more popular, so you can actually promote your channel or whatever faster that way. So for example, like you do like it's like someone from Game of Thrones or some other big show, and then you can just like it's like post that, and then you just like put a hashtag, Game of Thrones, and then a lot of people are going to see that, so you get more followers and stuff. And to me, I think it's pretty cool, and I'm not going to judge anyone doing that. I think that, and some people are genuinely big fans of the show, so more power to them. It's just like my specific case. I mean, like I'd rather do like.
Well, not me though.
Yeah.
Not me, because I'm too late to watch that.
I never watched, man. I'm not bragging or anything. I'm being one of those assholes saying like, "Oh, I never watched that." But I'm just saying like, I never watched that. I'm not interested. It's like I have too much stuff on my plate, and if I get too caught up, probably gonna be. I was like, it's like spending too much time watching it. But I mean, like people have to do whatever they want to do. It's like it's very cool if you can get and build your base. It's just like in my case, I try to do portraits of people who actually mean a lot to me. It's like those guys like Rick Baker, Dick Smith, and although they are known because there's a community of like makeup effects artists and everything, they're not like gigantic, man. It's not like a gigantic community that knows who Dick Smith is. It's just like a small community that knows. So my intention is always like to go and do create a nice portrait and create a nice result, but without appealing too much to the popular vote, So like, if it happens, fine. If it doesn't happen, I'm okay with that too. But again, like, so going back to the portrait stuff, right? I approach everything. I try to capture the main, let's say like a key kind of expression of that person, right? So in the case of those last three guys that I sculpted, people are like now saying like, "Oh, Chris doesn't know how to build angry people. Just everybody's smiling now." I was like, yeah, because I built some teeth and I want to show them off, of course, but also because the people actually I'm portraying, they have a very specific, it's like an identity, and most of them are very happy people. It's like if you watch interviews with Stan Winston, the guy was smiling all the freaking time, showing that big teeth, they're so charismatic. So he was always smiling. It's like I watched some interviews. It was very cool. And then with Ray Harryhausen, a lot of his pictures, he's smiling, showing like his very English teeth, right? Like super yellow and stuff. Sorry, guys. I don't want to. But it's like kind of like if you talk something about the Brazilians, I gotta say, yeah, you're right. But I mean, like, there's this stigma about the English teeth. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying all of them are like that, but there's this thing.
Well, they smile, but deep within, they are sad.
Yeah. So basically, like, he has a lot of pictures like that. And my wife, if I think about her, I don't think about her like as a grumpy person looking at me. I think about her with a big smile looking at me. So it's part of the characters that I'm trying to represent, combined with the fact that I have teeth model that I want to show as well. And it's always cool to create something that brings some joy to people too, Another thing that I do, for example, like from time to time, I build some demons, right? You can see like I have Hellboy, I have another demon posted on my Instagram. But the thing is, like, it's, in a way, it's almost like trying to get the demons out of myself. You know, it's like I'm, you know, but overall, I'm a very happy person, and I see a lot of like, there's this huge thing, especially with the makeup effects guys. You know, it's like there's this huge thing that everything becomes dark art, which is very cool. I mean, like my thing as a teenager was to read like a horror magazines, like the creepy magazine and stuff like that. I was fascinated with it, and I still love like horror stuff, you know. But
You like
I mean,
Stephen King?
yeah. I mean, like there's a lot of stuff. I worked on The Mist, for example, like, you know, and so I know a little bit of his work. But you know, it's like I like the dark side thing, right? Like, but you know, it's like, but a little bit from a distance, you know. It's like I go there sometimes and I get out of there. But overall, I'm kind of a little bit tired of a lot of the overly dark tones everywhere. You know, it's like I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying like my preference is that like every single movie is being remade to look darker and darker. You know, it's like the designs are getting darker, the mood's getting darker. There's a lot of dark art in there, you know. And I think like we have a ton of shit going on, like in general, like, in terms of the world politics right now. And if I can see someone making a cartoon that looks really cool and it has a lot of expression, it puts a smile in my face, I'm actually more drawn to that these days than look at something super detailed and super dark at the same time. And at the same time, I see people doing dark art in a very beautiful way as well. You know, it's like, it's almost like there's an elegance in the designs and everything. You know, it's like it becomes something much more interesting than going for something that's just like purely gore and stuff like that. To me, it's like, it's a little obvious dark, you know. It's almost like if you can make something and think about like yourself as a storyteller, you don't want to tell a story that's like completely obvious, right? Like you want to leave room for imagination. So basically, like, you can create dark art by being smarter about like the content of the dark art or the design of it. You know, it's like you can create something that's magnificent and beautiful, but with a very dark content. Like an example is, for example, like the movie I had the pleasure of working on, which was Pan's Labyrinth, right? Was one of my favorite movies to work on. And that's a fairy tale, very dark fairy tale, which basically like is similar to The Mist in a way, because it's kind of like the humans are the worst, right? Like the monsters in our imagination or in those underworlds and everything, they are actually not quite bad compared to the actual humans around us, right? So that's a very interesting and smart way of portraying darkness, you know. But a lot of people, they just like, they go for the obvious. I have a teacher that he was my teacher in college, that he said that people are too obvious in their interpretation of stuff. You know, for example, like someone is going to create a piece about pain, and then the piece about pain is going to be a conceptual one. So you're going to put this heart on a wall. It's going to be a red heart with a dagger stabbed in it, and then blood running from it. It's like, oh, that's pain? It cannot be more obvious than that, you know? Now think about something that's much more interesting than that and involves like pain in a much deeper level, a psychological kind of level, you know? And then you're going to have to really think about it as a storyteller to come up with something interesting that it can actually leave room for imagination, right? Like the first movie, Matrix, which like the destroy with Matrix 2 and 3 became so obvious, everything. But the first one, there's this huge room for imagination and things you can interpret different ways, like the same with the Star Wars, right? All this stuff, man. I mean, like over time, people just kill this, you know, this room for imagination, you know? It's like, and I think it's so important to keep. So when I go back to my stuff, I'm going to do some dark art as well, but I'm going to try to be a little bit more, you know, it's like more careful about the way I'm approaching it. So it's not so obvious, and at the end looks cheap, you know, it's like things look cheap if you make too obvious, but that's just my personal point of view, obviously. Just ranting here. But back to what matters. So in terms of the likeness itself, so I explore the primary shapes and the secondary shapes almost at the same time. You could see in the video, like, you know, it's like if you want to go back and rewatch it. So I start with the sphere. I block everything in place, try to get the proportions fairly in place, and then I go straight to the facial expression, and then I start blocking primary and secondary forms at the same time. If you're not confident about, you know, it's like your sense of proportions and stuff like that, or if you want to go for something that's kind of like a more methodical academic approach, which is always great, you can actually start with a sculpt of your base mesh is basically being a rough representation of a skull. So basically, like you're going to block like the brow ridge, and you're going to block like the zygomatic bone, it's like the chin, the teeth, and everything, to have that structure that you look at the skull, right? So you're going to have everything in place, but at the end of the day, the skull is just part of the whole thing, right? On top of the skull, you're going to have like a huge layer of muscles in there, and then it's going to have like another layer of muscles, and then you're going to have a layer of fat on top of the muscles. So in a way, for example, like it's very cool when you see someone sculpting anatomy and everything is like completely ripped, right? Like someone, like all the models, like especially Batman and like all those models, like superhero models, like zero fat because they're superheroes, so they have to be zero fat. But what I think it's cooler is actually the surface anatomy, which is basically like after it's like you have someone with a natural kind of face, right? So you have like all the muscles underneath. So you need to know them because you need to know the placement of everything. If I'm modeling the sternocleidomastoids, I want to know that's in there. But I also want to know the structures covering it, right? Like how they're going to behave as well. So I try to approach those things all together. It's like I don't bring, it's like if I was teaching like an anatomy class, for example, because I don't think I'm competent enough to teach an anatomy class at this point. I helped like Andrew Kars with anatomy tools. Like 3 times I was his guest sculptor, but guest instructor with him. But the thing is, like, he is the actual guy knowing the anatomy, knowing all the names and everything. And I was the guy in charge of helping people with ZBrush questions and how to realize that digitally. That's basically what was my role. I was not like an anatomy teacher with him, right? But if I was an anatomy teacher, I probably would start like with the skull, like I did in my class like 7 years ago or so. I started with the skull, blocking out like all the planes, the main planes, which is very important, by the way. You can find those if you look like, for example, like head planes or something like that, like for sculptors. You're gonna find like lots of reference from different artists, the way that they interpret all those faces. It's like, for example, like if you look from a distance, you should be able to actually recognize the person from a distance. And then that's because like the plane should be in the right spot, right? So for example, if you simplify this form here, you're gonna see a plane around here, and then you're gonna have another one on the side, then you're gonna have another one around here, then another one around there. And those planes are created by a combination of things. If you look at the skull alone, you're gonna have the wrong impression. You're gonna have the impression that all those planes are just like, okay, because the skull shows this area pretty hollow and flat, I'm gonna do the same, which is like kind of true for this area here, right? Because the temporalis. But in some other areas, you have to understand that there's a lot going on top. There are muscles covering entire masses of, it's like in filling up the gaps between those landmarks. So for example, if you have a strong brow ridge in here, you have to understand that there are muscles crossing this entire thing and going over and creating some secondary forms as well, right? So when you're talking about the planes, you're not talking about just the skull. You're talking about the combination of the skull, bones, the bones of the skull, the muscles, and the fat tissue as well, because that's what we're blocking at the end of the day, right? But again, like if I'm trying to teach like an anatomy class, I'm going to start with the skull. I probably would build the skull, and then I would start covering the skull with some muscles. And then with those muscles, for example, if I'm starting to hang the zygomatic muscles in here towards the corner of the mouth, right, coming from the zygomatic bone in there, then I'm going to start forming some planes. It's like just by creating this tension between those areas, not in this pose, obviously, because she's smiling, so everything's compressed in here. But in the neutral pose, you're going to see like some people, they represent the zygomatic here, actually really eating part of this area and creating an indentation and then a very, very pronounced zygomatic in here, especially with monsters, right? We see those guys making those strong muzzles, and it's like because they are really exaggerating the zygomatic underneath. So it's just like, and then if you look at the zygomatic, basically like creating this tension between like the corner of the mouth and the zygomatic bone in here, that's going to create another plane. So you're going to be able to see all those planes, but those planes are not, again, not described just based on the skull itself. When it comes to the skull around here, obviously, this is pretty bare, right? It's a very thin layer of skin that goes between this and the actual bone, right? But when you get more towards the forehead, then you have some very thin muscles, but still muscles covering it for the facial expressions. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to lift your eyebrows or anything like that. And then same for the temporalis, right? Like you need those big muscle in here to actually pull the maxilla up, right? Like so the jaw is basically like it's connected, like the temporalis here goes underneath and then pulls the entire thing up, right? So you have to have like this strong muscles here. That's why when you're like doing the chewing, you can see this whole area moving, right? It's just like all those muscles are being activated. Yeah, my approach is always very general, based on what I'm observing. It's almost like I don't see difference between modeling likeness for a human and modeling likeness for, I don't know, like a robot, right? Because I worked on like 5 Transformers movies now, and in the latest Bumblebee as well. So I mean, like I look at the reference and I was like, okay, how am I gonna approach that form, right? I can go like the methodical way of kind of like breaking things in layers, like I mentioned just now, or I can just go like, okay, what's needed for me to get to that final form, right? What's involved, and then everything that's in terms of anatomy knowledge and all this stuff takes like a back seat, and I keep like in the back of my mind constantly. For example, like especially if I don't have enough references from of someone. I can model like a huge chunk of the model just by looking at a few angles without comparing to a reference from other angles, just because I know how those relationships work in the real world, right? Like I observed enough like human faces to know certain things that you're gonna need, like a, you know, it's like this in the this cavity in here that you're gonna need this little form going over there, that I'm gonna have the nasolabial fold going and continue over the nose in here. I know those things. So when I look at the picture, I try to identify what type of lighting situation is there. And sometimes you get like very crappy ones, you know, it's like you have very little clue about what's going on with the picture. But just by observing real, you know, it's like, for example, like in her case here, you can see that little form on top of her nose in there. It's very pronounced. It makes her nose very peculiar. And then if you look from the front view, this one here, for example, although it's not like a very strong smile, you can actually see a little bit of it in that side as well. She was, this was like probably like 9 years ago, I think, say. And then, so yeah, I think she was pregnant with our first kid here. So yeah, it's like very subtle, you know, but you can see those things. And then I kind of like, I know the form is in there because I saw the person from different angles in pictures. But I mean, like stuff like the bridge of the nose, like I just mentioned today, I'm gonna have to tweak because seeing in real life is different, right? But I can get a ballpark and go a long way just by having some basic anatomy knowledge when it comes to faces. What happens when someone smiles? You know, it's like there's a combination of things, right? This whole mass of form in here is gonna be pulled up. It's gonna create like a squint because this is compressing things up, right? Like, so this is basically like lifting the entire area here. And then the smile itself, like it's not like just like basically like modeling the shape of the nasolabial, right? Around here, you see like it's slightly more, a little deeper than what the rest is. So it's kind of like from, you know, observing as well, that the pull in there is almost like it's kind of like a landmark, you know, if you pull deep enough, that's gonna get a little dimple in there, but the rest is not. And then all those combinations, you know, like doing portraits for a while, you just like, you start getting to know a little bit more of like the overall forms, right? And then it, like I said, I mean, like that's my way. I have the target in mind. So for example, like I'm gonna pick like an average smile, not like in some of the pictures is gonna be having like a very wide smile, and some of them a little bit more timid smile. And I'm gonna find one that looks more, you know, it's like more appealing to me, and I'm gonna go for that one. And then once I have that, sometimes it's not a direct reference, it's a cross reference between a big smile and no smile at all. And I'm gonna try to make up a smile that actually makes sense to me. And I'm gonna go straight to that pose, you know, it's like I'm gonna model everything to try to accommodate all those planes and everything, but almost like not thinking too much about it. That's why it's hard for me to kind of break down. Sometimes like people ask me like, can you break down how you plan your primary, secondary, tertiary forms? And it's hard for me because I'm using a very direct approach of likeness, and I'm using like anything related to what I know about primary and secondary forms, almost like as an underlying thing that's kind of like it's there, So I don't think too much about it. And then I get like to a ballpark, and then from that point on, it's just comparing pictures and see if the ballpark is it's close enough or not close at all. So for example, like I go to a 3/4 and I notice that the cheeks are not, don't have like enough volume. And this area here is very easy to actually get wrong when it comes like to this fold here, for example, like between the top lids in here and the eyebrow, right? And then basically like this relationship between the cheeks and then this area here, and then how it forms into the forehead. It's very tricky, you know. It's like I look from a profile like this, I look at some of her pictures like this, I can tell that the little form pops out a little bit more, so I know it's a little puffy in there, right? And here it looks like in her pictures, looks like it's much more volumetric, but the thing is like I have to consider the eyebrow is going to be placed in there, so that's going to add some volume as well. What happens if I remove the eyebrows, right? And then, but this is one angle. If I switch slightly like this, it was like, okay, so sometimes it works, sometimes it looks completely wrong. And then when you look from here, it looks completely correct. But then the relationship around here is wrong. Then when I get to the front, it looks correct again because it's a flat representation, right? So you look at this, it looks correct. Then you start rotating, oh, wrong, 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 oh, right, right. So, you know, it's like it's this thing that I mentioned like in the previous reviews, and it's going to be across the board, like for all the reviews I do. The biggest offender is normally the profile. So if I model something from the front, it's going to look great because, I mean, like you normally have like someone, like a front picture if you're trying to nail like a likeness, right? And then sometimes it's hard to find like a profile picture. And then people push very far with the front like this. And then when you turn to the profile, it looks completely wrong. There's no relationship that makes a lot of sense. And then when that happens, when you turn to the 3/4, obviously it's not going to work either because it's going to be a combination of everything that's wrong from the profile combined with everything that's right from the front. So you're going to get like an average right and wrong at the same time.
Chris?
Yes.
Like based on what you just said, but don't you think that even if a person like does a lot of work with the front image, but it has like the basic knowledge of anatomy like you do and understand where it goes where, like, right, do you think that that will like help a little bit when the person changes to the profile view and back to work again from there? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like I do this a lot, right? Like I try to do a similar approach. I start with the front, but I don't, it's not like just getting stuck with the front. I try to model the front and the 3/4 to at least like make some sense, right? So I try to get those a little bit in the ballpark. When I turn to the profile, then it's going to be wrong still, but it's going to be a little bit closer to right because I was actually concerned about modeling the 3/4 and the front. So basically, like instead of like going just front, if you can get like a reference for front and 3/4 and try to get like this distance here, for example, like between the corner of the eye and the ear, slightly in the ballpark, then when you start turning, things kind of maybe they're going to make a lot more sense. You know, it's like it's not going to be that far. Her ear here in this case looks too big for me. So I'm going to be probably like bringing her ear up slightly and then maybe like making it a tiny little bit smaller. But I mean, like, yeah, it's like definitely the anatomy knowledge doesn't matter like if you put in practice like directly by modeling like every single layer of it. But if you have that in the back of your mind constantly, thinking about how things are behaving and comparing to what you know as a human being in this world, like you end up like having a better result, you know? If I'm modeling like this cheeks in here, for example, I'm constantly thinking about, you know, it's like what's happening here? Is this just a form that's just built that way? Or is basically like it's a combination of all those gears being pulled in here. If you treat this as a machine, right? You have all those gears being, you know, it's like being activated underneath and pulling all those cables. And those cables are pulling the nasolabial in, but they're leaving behind this massive forming here, which is at the same time like being kept in place. So the nasolabial is being pulled, this is being kept in place, but it's being compressed at the same time like a balloon. So if there's compression in here, I'm thinking about what's around it. So if the eyebrows are the next in line for contact, I'm thinking about how are they compressing. If they're compressing, that explains why she has this double little fold in there that adds more naturalism to it. So every time I'm actually changing things, I'm constantly thinking about the surroundings. And this is like a unconscious thing, I believe, at first, but then it becomes conscious at some point, because like I'm actually trying to respect those forms and thinking about how things behave in the real world. But at the same time, you know, it's like at some point I start to become a little bit more conscious about it. I was like, okay, I went too far with that. Maybe that doesn't justify, for example, like if you're sculpting libraries of blend shapes, for example, for a digital double, right? You have to be very careful about how you're building them, because sometimes you can overdial stuff, and sometimes you can use instead of like using a big brush like this to move like large forms and create like a nice fall off, like it's a very big one, to create, for example, like those cheeks going up, right? Sometimes people make a mistake that's making like just tiny little movements. They move the laser label here until it gets to this position and barely move this area here at all, or barely add any volume to it at all. And then if you're trying to do something convincing, you're gonna go for bigger forms. You're gonna move large forms, and you're gonna try to add compression and build up those forms, you know, to create something more naturalistic. And then obviously, like I said before, if she's smiling here, this is not isolated. It's not just like pulling the corners of the mouth and then getting done and the nasal label in place. You're gonna have to add like a little dimple in there, depending on the person, but for the most part, you're gonna have to build up this form. And there's another thing that happens in here too, depending if the squint is a strong one, you're probably gonna start getting some forms built around here as well. So for example, like if I do something very rough here for you to see, so for example, like you're gonna get something even around here that's gonna be built up to look like, you know, it's like there's some extreme expression happening there. So basically like the wrinkle is gonna be stronger in this case, and you're gonna have a buildup of this area that's gonna be basically like become the zygomatic in here. So it kind of goes around like that. So all those things you have to observe how it is in your own face, right? Like having a mirror right in front of you is very helpful. But just don't get too much into the mirror, because sometimes I see people modeling, but they model like facial libraries. They model themselves, right? So they're using like the library, and then sometimes you have like a weird thing that happens to your face that nobody has. For example, a dimple that happens right there that only you have. And then I know an artist that he used to build that little dimple in every single of his characters, and you can tell that nobody has that. And then he has it, you know, so you can tell that he's actually using a mirror to represent that. So, but yeah, I hope like it gave you a little insight about this stuff, you know. But I mean, to me, is I really try to represent like the attitude of the person, an overall expression that represents that person well, and approaching the forms themselves is like using all the knowledge I have, like in terms of the anatomy, as basically like as something that's actually holding the structure for me, but at the same time not thinking too much about it. I'm kind of like trying to actually represent the form to look correct from different angles, you know, and that's basically it for me.
Yeah, man, thank you very much. A lot of good insights. Thanks. You.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. Guys, thank you so much. I hope like this one was helpful. I tried to come up with something, I mean, like, that's a little bit more, the time is better used, I would say, because otherwise I would be just like grooming her hair again today. And that's going to take me days, you know. It's like you're going to see probably like in the next couple of weeks, lots of iterations when it comes to the hair. But I just want to make this a little bit more useful for you guys. So thank you so much for the suggestions, and I hope you enjoyed it. So, and I see you guys tomorrow. And I'm going to be sending out very soon like the invitation to the meeting this Saturday, happening again like 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Pacific time. And I'm gonna send you guys with some reference time. For example, like it's like from the date and time of this email, the review is gonna happen in 12 hours or something like that, you know. And we're gonna try to stick with a similar deadline that we had last time, which is basically like Friday night, or in the middle of the night here in California. And but I'm gonna keep you guys informed about the times and everything, and you should get the emails between today and tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out. And once I have that done, I'm gonna post in the group as well, so you guys have like 2 different sources to track that. Thank you again, guys, and have a great one.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys.